It's Capricorn season. Perfect time to work extra hard, especially when it gets challenging. It's the final week of the month, you know what that means, it's style study time! Today we're taking a look at a style that I've honestly been pushing back and back because I just didn't want to do it because I knew it would be a challenge, but you know what, it's finally time. Today we're going to take a look at some beautiful, intricate manga. More specifically, we're going to take a look at the work of Japanese artist Kawacy. Sorry if I said it wrong, but he's better known by his online name, Kawacy. Also, in case you couldn't tell, I'm actually super ill today. I started falling ill last night, of course I did, but it's not the Rona, don't worry, but it's probably just the weather flip-flopping, so I promise I'll look a lot more presentable next week. Anyway, today's style study has been requested 4 separate times, so massive thank you to Sunshine, Juliet Rose, Zara M, and X Fantasy X for requesting this video. I hope you guys all enjoy it and that it's everything you've been looking for. Right, if you're a style study veteran and you know why you're here, first of all, thank you so much for coming back. I'm so glad you're here, and you can go ahead and skip to part 1. All the timestamps are always in the video description. But if you're new here, hi, welcome. My name is Srish, and I'm so glad you're here because today we're gonna level up your art by like 1,000,000%. Style Study is a regular series we do here on my channel where we take a look at some of our favorite contemporary artists, analyze their work, and see what we can learn from it. Keyword, learn. We're not trying to plagiarize anyone's work, we're not trying to copy anyone's style, we're just here to learn some cool techniques and see if we can use them to find our own unique art style. I usually structure my style studies in 3 parts. In part 1, we'll take a look at Kawacy's work, analyze his style, and see what we can learn from it. Part 2 will be a study of one of his original paintings. The reference I've chosen today is this one, and sadly there's not going to be a part 3 for this video because I am so ill I haven't even finished part 2, so forgive me. Check out all the other style studies that have a part 3. I am sorry, please don't hate me. As always, if you enjoyed this video, please do let me know by giving it a big thumbs up and leave a comment below. Hit that subscribe button because there's way more style studies coming for the rest of this year. Alrighty, whenever you're ready, grab a snack, sit back, and let's dive into another style study featuring Kawacy. Kawacy is a manga artist from Tokyo, Japan, who has an ongoing webcomic called Black Blooded and plays The Sims 4. That's pretty much all the info I could find about him online, but what we do have is a ton of absolutely stunning art. Obviously, his style is very manga-based, and there are these gorgeous, adorable characters in complex, intricate scenes, but I noticed that there is one common running theme through all of his artwork, which is the art of illusion. We'll dive into this today, and I promise you're gonna fall in love with it. He paints a lot of fan art and has so much art about Caleb Vator, and though I'm personally not a fan of that story in particular, the art itself is beautiful. But regardless of which character he's painting, the scene is always super dreamy and dynamic. Kawacy's beautiful illustrations have garnered him over 1 million followers on Instagram and over 549,000 followers over on Twitter. Okay, really quick, before we dive into the art, am I the only one who, after reading the name Kawacy, immediately thought of that Chaz Smith line that was like Kawacy Farmer Kawaii? This one.
I don't know what your name's incorrectly. Kawacy A. Farmer Quai. Cam, P-Bells. But Mama Nums. Monkey Necks. Beaver Age. Ruches and Combis. Rosasa Papas.
I can't stop playing it in my head over and over, please send help. Anyway, I think what makes Kawacy's art so unique and memorable is how it's always a scene. Even though the characters are the primary focus of the paintings, they are always actively engaged in a scene. So instead of looking like splash screen art, it's like a cutscene. Hello, fellow gamers. And like I said before, these scenes are always extremely dynamic, even in a seemingly static moment. environment. No matter how simple it may seem, there are always elements in motion and loads of long fluid lines that constantly keep our eyes moving around the scene. There are often loads of storytelling elements in the foreground, midground, and background that make the scene look rather crowded, but without being completely impossible to read and understand. We'll take a look at how he balances out the visually noisy elements, but one thing's for sure, when it comes to painting the finer details, he's definitely not a minimalist. Here's a list of 4 key characteristics to Kawacy's art. It's a lot. Like seriously, when you look at the scenes, even if it is just a close-up headshot of a character, there is so much going on that you almost feel a little overwhelmed, but not quite. You have the character, their hair, their outfit and accessories, sometimes multiple characters, and then you have the immediate surroundings, maybe some flowers and leaves, a bed, some books, and then you have the stuff a little further back, like a bookshelf or some architecture, often even more plants. That's how I know he plays The Sims 4. And then even further back, you have the sky, some clouds, some birds. But loads of artists paint detailed scenes. We looked at Zine Chin last month, and he certainly paints a lot of details. So why does Kawacy's art look a lot more crowded and frantic? Well, it's because all the surrounding elements have just as many details as the characters themselves. So it's not like the elements in the back are blurred or low definition in order to draw focus to the characters. Everything has light and shadow, everything has color and dimension. While we already know that having very anime proportions makes the characters look super youthful, the crowded background further pushes the idea of chaos around them, kind of like how the world feels when you're little. But how, with everything being so well rendered, do we still get drawn right to the characters? What is it that guides our eyes to the face? You might instantly think leading lines, and yes, you do have some leading lines in the hair, the clothing, sometimes even in the background elements, but these are super subtle and often lost in the surrounding elements that don't point to the characters. I'd actually say that what drives us to the characters is the contrast. When you look at the characters, they have a full value range from highlights all the way to the shadows, so there is a very good balanced amount of contrast. However, as you go further and further back into the scene, you'll see that the contrast becomes softer because the darkest shadows actually tend to be fairly pale. So here, for instance, the darkest background tone in the trees is a pale, low saturated mid-tone, whereas with the characters, the darkest tone is a super dark shadow tone verging on black. If you watched style studies before, you'll know that this is a concept we see very often, and it is called atmospheric perspective. The further away something is from you, the more atmosphere there is between you and the object, and this causes distant objects to appear hazy and grey. So when in a painting we see objects that appear low contrast and hazy, despite them being very detailed with no blur, they still look blurry and pushed into the background. And that, you guys, is what keeps these scenes from looking super crowded and busy, is the depth created by atmospheric perspective that essentially widens the space inside the scene. When it comes to the lighting, the scenes are almost always very well lit, with little dappled areas of sunlight directly hitting the characters. Everything is almost always bathed in a warm glow, with low saturated, cooler toned shadows. What's interesting is that even though there is a strong ambient light and some direct key light, everything still looks soft and almost watercolory. I think one key reason for this is that the shadows are very gradual, so instead of having very dark, narrow ambient occlusion, you'd have a gradual fade from the mid-tone to the shadow. That's not to say that the shadows are airbrushed in. I mean, in some cases they are, but in the majority of the elements, you'll see that even where the shadows are hard-edged, there are several steps of value that lead up to the darkest tone rather than just going from mid-tone to shadow in one fell swoop. But shadows aside, let's talk a little more about the light itself, because there are a couple of very interesting aspects here. The first is that in areas where the light hits the character directly, or it hits any other element really, the brightest highlight is often surrounded by a glare of highly saturated bright oranges, yellows, and reds, like a ring of fire around the highlight tone. On skin, this suggests subsurface scattering that you'd see around the edges when daylight hits the skin. The blood under the surface of the skin reflects an orangey red glow in the area just around the brightest highlight, but things like trees and furniture and fabric, they don't have blood under the surface, so why do they still have an orangey glow around the brightest tones? Another thing I noticed was that in the vast majority of Kawacy's work, the sunlight seems to hit from a side, not overhead, meaning the sun is quite low, and that's when it hit me. With the low sun and the orange glow, this is all golden hour. The thing about golden hour is that while you have warm highlights and cool shadows, the midtones are usually a super saturated yellow or orange before it transitions into the shadow tone. And this is something you'll see in pretty much every painting, and this would also explain why everything feels super dreamy and fairy tale-like. It's because golden hour is historically the dreamiest, most fantasy-like form of sunlight. Maybe there is a science to fairy tales. You know how I said everything looks soft and watercolory? Well, here's the thing, in pretty much every Kawacy painting, although the characters are the elements of highest contrast, they are also the element of softest blending. Because really, the one place you'll always see a soft, seamless gradient is in the skin. Maybe a little bit in the hair, but mostly in the skin. And you'll sometimes have a bit of blending in the more rounded elements such as belts or eyeballs, but the vast majority of the scene is usually quite hard-edged. However, since the details are usually small and low contrast, it creates an illusion of softness, and it is this illusion that makes you think of watercolors, because with watercolors, you don't really have that much control over the edges. I mean, some people are actual wizards with watercolors, but in my experience, a lot of the softness in that medium comes from the gradual build-up of tones, and contrast is determined by the actual value of the tone rather than the hardness of the edge. One extra point I want to mention here is how the blending creates balance. We've seen time and time again how having loads of elements and edges and colors in a small space creates a visually noisy spot, whereas a soft blend creates a visually quiet zone. Well, when you look at Kawacy's work, you'll notice that the softest blends are in the face. The nose and mouth are minimized to almost just look like little smudges, and the face as a whole is an extremely quiet zone surrounded by a sea of chaos. So as a viewer, what Kawacy is doing is guiding your eyes around the canvas via the lighting and details, but in the back of your mind you know that if it gets too much, you can always fall back on the quieter areas of the painting, i.e. the faces. And the faces are generally around the center of the canvas, meaning if you were trying to exit the canvas, you would have to wade through a lot of noisy elements, but those are arranged in such a way that they keep leading you around the painting and then you go right back to the face. I'm sure you see where I'm going with this, but as an artist, your goal is to keep people engrossed in a painting, and Kawacy accomplishes exactly that by making sure that the softest blends are in the face. There are three key finishing details I want to talk about today because they really push the story and enhance the painting. The first is that he sharpens the elements of design. So the print on a fabric, hair accessories, jewelry and such, anything that is man-made and solid on the character gets extra sharp edges. This is super important because you know how I said the skin is so smooth, it almost feels like an area for your eyes to rest on? Well, I think these sharp elements are what gets you moving away from the skin again to notice something new about the painting. That way you're not just trapped within the face and then move on when you're done looking at it. The second finishing detail is the haze and floating specks of light. Not only do these create loads of extra smaller shapes to really populate the scene, they also add a ton of movement. Haze and floating specks are only carried by the wind, and that further enhances the dynamism. And the final detail, and this is one I genuinely think makes the painting seem finished, is orange chromatic aberration. I love this technique so much that I did a whole Patreon tutorial tutorial on it this week because it's just that smart. Basically, if you look closely at a fair few paintings, you'll see red chromatic aberration that has been hue shifted to look orange. And this is not just on the line art, it is everywhere, especially around areas where the key light directly hits the surface. And that's when I realized, oh my god, this is why it looks like golden hour. It's because this selective aberration makes it look like all the transition areas between light and shadow are glowing orange, which is what you see at golden hour. Obviously, he places it carefully and selectively, but you'll especially see this around the shadows on the skin, by the line art in the hair, and around the metallic accessories. Such a simple tweak, so easy to integrate, and it makes a big difference to the story. So, to sum up part 1 of this video, here are the 4 key characteristics to Kawacy's art. Number 1, he crowds the background with tons of elements in order to create a dynamic composition, but uses low contrast to create depth of field. 2, the lighting is fairly bright with dappled sunlight, but the overall warmth and haziness of the piece is reminiscent of golden hour lighting. Number 3, although everything looks soft and blended, the vast majority of the composition is actually hard-edged, and the only soft blends are in the face and the hair. This causes the face to feel like a quiet spot in a sea of chaos. And number 4, he uses sharp design elements, haze, and floating specks of light to push the dynamism and an orange chromatic aberration to further enhance the golden light. For the study today, this is the beautiful reference I've chosen, because it is one of the Powerpuff Girls and I don't care who you are, they were the best. Also, Miss Bellum was a baddie and you know it. Anyway, I started with a sketch, as you always do, and while I did struggle with the line art, I got it as good as I could before realizing that the majority of it was gonna get painted over. Can you tell I love line art? Next was flattening everything in on its own separate layer. The colours didn't matter too much, but I did try to match them to at least one tone in each element that Kawacy painted. This step is mostly so that we can eventually lock transparency and paint within the lines. I purposely kept the hair super blocky for now, because doing all the strand details is best kept for the end of the piece. One thing I want to mention right off the bat is that the colours in his paintings are super deceptive. For instance, look at the shadows in the hair, the ribbon, and the non-flowery arm. They look blue, right? You look at them and that's a low saturation blue or maybe even cyan. Nope, it's actually a greyish pink/purple. But because the colours are all warm shifted, because again, golden hour, it all actually looks blue. I also fully painted one eye to be way bigger than the other. Don't worry, I did eventually go fix it, but hush, I was dealing with a fever and literally shivering in my seat. Get off my case. Personally, I found the fabric the most fun to paint because it was an excellent study in folds and form and how light affects wrinkles in clothing. The part I least enjoyed, however, was the hair. This is one of those things that is fun when you're painting it in an original painting, but when it comes to studying how someone else has painted stylized hair, oh, it's painful. Oh, it is so painful, because there are so many small details that, while he was painting it originally, he probably found that it just sort of happened as he layered brushstroke over brushstroke. I'm not at all trying to minimize his effort and say that it's hard work for him, because I mean, look at it. No, what I mean is it becomes extra difficult when you then try to study just the surface level hair, which is the result of gradually built up shapes and colors that happened over several hours. The reason I say this is because I know a lot of you guys love to study your favorite manga, semi-realistic artists, and I'll bet the hair is the hardest part to replicate. Don't be too hard on yourself because you're only seeing the end product, not following the same process as he did. I feel like I had to do like 5 passes to be even remotely happy with the hair, but it turned out pretty cool. Then, with all the big shapes in place, it was time to zoom in and get the smaller details like the eyeliner, the specular highlights, and all the smaller details in the hair. It always comes back to the hair. For the metallic zipper thing on the jacket, I actually cheated. I grabbed a rectangle stamp brush that is customized so that it puts down rectangles with spaces between them. I then realized it was too thin, so I duplicated the layer and I moved it so it would act like a second row that blends into the first one. I also made a black duplicate to give it that line art that's around each rectangle, because there is no way in hell your girl has the patience to individually line art every single rectangle. I told you, this year we're working smarter, not harder. For the little sakura flowers you see here, I downloaded a stamp brush and put one stamp down. I then modified that stamp to match the flowers in the painting. I then just duplicated, resized and repositioned each one to match the painting. I also added chromatic aberration to the entire white layer, and yeah, Critter crashed on me like thrice. I eventually switched to Photoshop to run a few liquify passes and readjust the reds in the piece, and here's the final painting. I actually quite like it. And there we have it, Kawacy demystified. Massive thank you again to Sunshine, Juliet Rose, Zara M and X Fantasy X for requesting this video. I hope you guys enjoyed it and that it's been everything you've been looking for. And if the rest of you guys have enjoyed this video and learned something today, please remember to like, comment, subscribe, the usual. It helps the channel out so much. And if there are any other artists you'd like to see a style study on in the future, feel free to leave them in a comment below and I'll add them to my list. Come check out a lot more content on my Patreon. It helps out this channel so much. Or if you just want to come say hi, I'll leave a link to my Discord and my Instagram down below and you can get in touch with me over there. That sounds so grown up, get in touch with me. But yeah, thanks so much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have. Check out some more style studies up here and I'll see you guys on the next one. Bye!